Hello, it's good to have you join us on Global Morning this beautiful Sunday. I love the weather. You need to be in Abuja right now because we know it's been like in the last few weeks. It's been really hot, but this time around this morning, it feels really calm and cozy. And that's how we want to start our day. My name is Anita Patrick, and of course, I'm doing this alone. I have my co-anchor with me in the studio, President Mukhtar Kasim, and we have a lot, Mukhtar.
It's a beautiful morning, like you rightly said. The weather is calm, and the atmosphere is basically a nice one, and there's a lot in stock for our audience, and it's going to be an amazing shift as always.
Okay, amazing run for us this particular Sunday, because we have a whole lot to talk about in this particular space of the breakfast program, and we have lots lined up for you. We have the newspaper review segment.
Most definitely.
We have also the food depart where
Taste
you like
and
to
texture.
and we also have discussion segments around what's happening with our economy, what's happening with the budgeting, how Nigerians are looking at it,
The debt and all of that.
you know, all of
I
those
was reading a very
questions.
funny post. It's a meme. You know how social media could be there. They're like, with the way the budget is going, every Nigerian seems to bring over 700,000 there. I was
I'm
like,
telling you.
why am I owing money without my knowledge?
There's a whole lot
So it's
happening.
not really.
It's not encouraging, because
It's
a
not
whole lot of
encouraging.
concerns around issues. People need to find a balance in their daily life, and they're
Exactly.
struggling with meeting up with billings and all that. A lot of bills here and there.
Are everywhere.
And the fact that is annoying to Nigerians is the fact that they're struggling because there's no increments to what they have in their pockets or their
Exactly.
accounts.
We've seen the price of fuel go up. We've seen
Food prices
everything
go
go
up.
up, but the pockets of the masses are not up. So that's a mismanagement. There's no balance. So people have been clamoring that let's find the balance. If things are going up, let's also find a reflection to have the soft landing, if you like.
Okay, so while we look forward to having that soft landing, let's quickly head to our newspaper review segment. I will tell you stories making rounds on the front cover of the dailies. Please stay with us. It's good to have you join us back on this particular segment of Global Morning. Let's quickly tell you that we have lots of papers lined up for us. We start basically with the Sunday Sun newspaper. We also have the Sunday Tribune newspaper. We have this day newspaper, Daily Independence, The Nation, Vanguard, and a whole lot more lined up for you this morning. But let's quickly start with the front lead cover of the Sunday Sun newspaper, which leads boldly with its lead story on the front page cover, and it says aftermath of convention, and there it has it saying ADC still at crossroads. And of course, a lot of riders that companies that lead story says legal hurdles, internal revolt, others threatening parties' chances ahead 2027. And we have another one that says APC, INEC, presidency's action actions against opposition parties may lead to anarchy. Okori and Shelley speaking there. We also have where it says ADC cause own crisis, blaming Tinubu, court, INEC, nonsensical. That's Abayomi speaking, and that story is on page 18 and 19 of the front page cover of Sunday Sun. And above that story, or below, let's finish up with the stories below. Below that story, a bit of insecurity issues there. It says we need state police, but governors will abuse it. Senator Arise. I also have read that says governors too powerful can determine outcome of the particular elections already. And that story is on page 21 of the Sunday Sun newspaper. And above the masthead there, where we have
other stories above the masthead. Just by the right hand corner, you see a story that says why Bala Mohammed's planned defection to APC collapsed, with riders that said Bauchi governor, state PDP explore fresh political options, and Oshun, how Aregbesol's ADC strengthen Oyebami's electoral victory. All of this story you would find on pages 12 and 25 of the Sunday Sun newspaper. And of course, away from that story, just by the middle, a bit of security says Benue kidnap, police arrest 7 suspects in joint security operations, with a rider that says kidnapped Benue travelers, not UTME candidates. That is Jam speaking, with details on page 27 of the Sunday Sun newspaper.
Okay, so that's the much we have there basically on the Sunday Sun newspaper. Let's quickly turn our focus and see what's happening with the next paper for us, which is the Sunday Tribune newspaper, which has its lead story there boldly written there. And then you have the president there, his picture as well, speaking to this issue. It says revealed how criminals use cleanup to steal crude oil. And you have the writer that says the Navy intensifies crackdown on all thieves, uncovers 600 million naira illegal network. And that story is on page 30, and of course we have on page 5 as well. That tells you details of what it means.
Both in the oil sector, and why we've been seeing a lot of mismanagement in that particular sector. But let's not too dwell on the story and take you above the nameplate by the right hand side. The story here says Nigeria bleeding from within, Obi declares, with a writer that says expresses worry over rising corruption, with details on page 4 of the Sunday Tribune newspaper.
Okay, so we have where it talks just beside that story there. We have bandits.
It says
bandits adopt traditional ruler in Kwara, cut away money, and that story is on page 8 of the Sunday Tribune newspaper. And still talking about the issue of banditry and kidnapping. Let's come down on below the major headline of the Sunday Tribune there on the left hand side there. It says Benue kidnap, victims not UTME candidates. Yes, Mutari. That story is I watch most papers today.
Certainly.
And police have said they arrest fake jam coordinator in Anambra. Police are also arresting the fake jam.
And the funny one again, even yesterday we saw police arresting students alongside their parents, saying they were able to use AI.
AI has own pros and cons.
Exactly. That's why people have been saying AI is very advantageous, but we should use it with ethics. Okay. And we are seeing people using it without ethics now, and even manipulating the JAM portal and all of that. So it still boils down to us being regulating all these new emerging technologies. Yeah. It's not something that we should sleep on, actually.
Okay.
Away from that particular story, you see a story that's business. It says Ajakuta Steel will give Nigeria $14 billion annually. That is Oyelaron Oyinkan speaking, and details are on page 5 of the Sunday Tribune newspaper. And
away from that, we have 2026 Hajj, first batches of pilgrims from Turkey, Pakistan. Others arrive in Saudi Arabia. That story is on page 2 of the Sunday Tribune.
Let's still go below. A story that has also been awash other papers. It says Governor Bala's planned defection to APC crashes, with a writer that says Bauchi PDP seeks alternative platform. Details you find on page 4 of the Sunday Tribune newspaper.
Okay, so and that's it with this particular people. Although we have that of the Guba battle, the Guba battle there where it talks about
Yes,
the APC.
It says Guba battle and APC with all riders that say Oyo, Nasarawa, others face direct primary. Another rider says Power Minister Adelabu to declare intention. With the last rider here saying Tinubu keeps Lagos stakeholders guessing. This particular story, you find the details on page 2 of the Sunday Tribune newspaper. And that's about the much you can take from the Sunday Tribune newspaper. We move to our next paper, which is the This Day newspaper. And of course, the This Day newspaper also has its own big story here, and it's politics. It says, citing unacceptable terms, Bauchi PDP holds defection talks with APC. And it has a rider here that says, accuses APC leadership of rejecting key conditions presented during the negotiations. And of course, still other stories here. Just go below, you see a story that says, oil tankers come under fire as Iran reimposes restriction on the Straits of Hormuz, with riders here that say warns of prolonged control unless US lifts port blockade. Another rider says Trump dismisses Tehran's move, says US won't be blackmailed. More riders. One here says India summons Iran's ambassador, lodges protest over attack of oil vessels. And the last rider here says global oil supply fear resurfaces as tension threatens energy security. All the stories you find on page 5 of the This Day newspaper.
And then just look above that, we have above the head, masthead there, we have where it says Cardoso global shocks not slowing Nigeria's push for resilience. Single digits inflation target. That's about business. And you also have lots of riders there. Let's take this one. It says data driven MPC stands on rates vindicated. I also have Adun speaking, says reforms strengthen economy's ability to withstand global stocks. And that story is on the front page cover there, where you need to pick up and find out other stories making the rounds.
A story here that concerns us as journalist Anyeti. He says presenters who express opinions as facts bully guests risk sanctions. That is NBC warning TV and radio stations. They're quite interesting one. The details of this story on page 7 of the This Day newspaper.
Okay, well, we have another story around the picture story there. If you come down that picture story, there's a story just below it there. It says ensuring terrorism doesn't change our way of life. Find out what's happening with that story. I think that had this with the picture story. It's talking about what it does. And then if you come down a bit down there, there was one of the stories with that says to protect domestic firms, managed forex, FG bans importation of paracetamol, other medicines. That story is on page 6.
That was in the news yesterday, and people have been saying it's like a good move, but in the mainstay, what plans does the government have for people to be able to take care of themselves if this ban is in place? So we hope to see that it's one that is workable for all concerned, of course.
Okay, so that takes us to the next paper, which is...
Of course, the next paper for review here is the Sunday Independent newspaper. And it has a
lead story
that starts
there. Let's start with that particular story that talks about the Boa Group.
It says Boa Group chairman emerges man of the year at Independent Newspapers Awards 2025, with a rider that says Governor Bonvere, Mba Yusuf, Ododo, others also celebrated. And that's the lead story here. But if we go above the nameplate to the top, you see a story that says ADC convention, sub judice, big political gamble. Stakeholders speaking about the ADC crisis and what it intends and portends for 2027. Well, let's go below the big story by your right, the color story here. It says Tantalia records over 70% success in oil pipeline protection, surpasses contractual benchmark, and that's a report. Other stories here says the technocrats case, why Oyebamiji may offer Oshun its most strategic path forward. Details of this particular story you find on page 22 of the Sunday Independent.
Okay, so
newspaper.
and then just below that story, you see the picture of the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Economy there, where it says experts split over tariff overhaul as Nigeria weighs growth against protection. And that story is there for you to pick up a copy of the paper and find out more details of that story. Well, that brings us to the size of the front page cover
Of Sunday Independent newspaper.
So let's take our focus and look at what's happening with the Sunday Telegraph newspaper. Sunday Telegraph newspaper has a lot of stories, trust me, on this front page cover. But let's start with the lead story that stands as its major story there, and then we'll take others as it goes. It says NAS high turnover, 14 senators opt out over Guba ambitions and appointments. Also, it has the word that says political realignment, defections threaten others. We have long-serving reps face battles to retain seats. All of this is contained on page 2 of the Sunday Telegraph newspaper.
And of course, that's a lot. Well, let's go above that particular story and tell you a story here that says resignation, how Tuga left Foreign Affairs Ministry in frustration. That's a diplomat there speaking with riders that say he wants to run for Bauchi governorship, says presidency. Another rider says ex-ambassador may return to private business. And that's all about this particular story here.
Still talking about politics and the
drama.
We have the story just around the left-hand corner there of above the masthead. It says PDP factions contest Anyao's position as secretary, and we have the writer that says remove his name from your portal. Turakis Group tells INEC. And then that story is on page 3 as well. It makes it easy for you to get the resignation story and also the PDP faction story on the same page. And then just beside that story there on the right-hand corner there, it talks about Charlie Boy, I pray to see better Nigeria in my lifetime. And that story is on page 15, 16. I'm sure he has his reasons for such statements.
And of course, we'd like to say a big amen because it's long overdue for us to see a better Nigeria.
We look forward to having a better country, of course. Everyone wants something working for themselves. But let's go away from that story and tell you other stories making the rounds are also in the lead up to the stories. Just beside there on the left-hand side, it says past APGA leaders traded with party since 2002. And that's Soludo speaking. Stay on page 3. I don't know that all the political stories
on page
the
3, so you don't have to go scrambling around.
You just stay on page 3 and enjoy what's happening in the political space.
Another story here, just below that particular story, it says Nigeria, Morocco to deepen parliamentary partnership. And details on page 5. And below that story, it says 2027, Makinde in dilemma as allies flirt with APC's Ali. Another story that you find on page 3 of the Sunday Telegraph.
So everything that has to do with politics is just on page 3. And then, of course, we have other stories as well. There it says criminals tap wellheads, use technology to beat security. And that's Tantita report there. That story is on page 4 of the Sunday Telegraph newspaper.
Of course, we've heard that, so it's now left for the security forces to also find a way of maneuvering their way and getting the better of this criminal element that they have identified. Well, that's all about the size of what we can take on Sunday Telegraph. I think it's time for us to move to the next paper, which is going to be the Nation's newspaper.
So the Nation's newspaper has its stories and stories with also the build up to 2027 there. It says 2027 anxiety as parties, aspirants intensify consultations on nomination. And of course, there's a whole lot of riders to the story. It says Binani Group dumps Adamawa ADC, blasts national leadership. We also have Deputy Senate President gets opponents in Kanot. We have Okowa Mwoko set for Delta North APC showdown. And all of that story is on page 5 of the Nation newspaper. And then you have the picture story that talks about the states of the parties, part 2. And that story is on page 17. We have pictures of governors and also, everything around where you need to find out. Yeah, we have where it says fresh uproar on the left-hand side there in PDP over suspension claim. That story is on page 7 of the Nation newspaper.
And of course, below that story, there's a story here that says oil theft, 586 arrested, 28 convicted in crackdown, with details on page 6 of the Nation's newspaper. And also below that, you see another story, a foreign story actually. It says Iran reimposes restriction in the Strait of Hormuz, with details on page 2 of the Nation's newspaper.
And of course, we have a foreign story there where it talks about Iran. Iran reimposes restrictions in the Strait of Hormuz. That story is on page 2. Well, a whole lot happening, but let's quickly tell you that that's the much we can take on that particular story there. Well, let's quickly look at other stories making the rounds on the Punch. Sunday Punch newspaper. Sunday Punch newspaper has its lead story, still talking about politics. Sunday Punch says Ayawo expulsion battle. And then it says zonal leaders plot PDP takeover. The PDP story with Ayawo all over. I watch all papers. And we have the riders there that says legal tussle threatens Wike-led party structure. We also have another one that says we're ready to end this crisis. Zonal chairman speaking there. We also have analysts warn expulsion will nullify key decisions. And that story is on page 3. And above, still sticking to elections and preparations to 2027 there. At the right-hand corner there, we have Rising Telecoms attacks spark fears for 2027 polls. That story is still on page 3. Page 3 seems to leading
with all the juicy political stories, certainly.
So we have that there. We also have beside there a bit of aviation there. You have where it says Nigerians sleep at airports over Lusana strike. That story is on page 5. And of course, other stories on the left-hand side there.
Other stories making the round include this particular one that has also been awash many newspapers. It says defection, sharing formula, T.S. Bauchi, governor, APC apart. And details on page 13. Let's go below. It says forest guards search for abducted Kwara monarch and his wife. With details on page 6. And still sticking with security, it says again, Army decries low Southeast recruitment, and details of this particular story is on page 4 of the Sunday Punch newspaper. And still talking more stories from Sunday Punch. Another story here says just beside this particular story we took, it says silent death, tragic stories of youth lost in urban isolation, with details on page 20 and 21 of Sunday Punch newspaper. Another one here says faith, patience sustained my 60-year marriage. Octogenarian businessman, a bit of a human angle story there, Anita.
Okay, so still talking human angle story there. Beside that story there, we have where it says silent death, tragic stories of youth lost to urban isolation, and that story is still on page 20 and 21. Still talking about issues around human angle and the issue around tragic concerns. We have 7 die, 60 injured in Ogun. Kano Road crashes.
That's a pleasant
well,
one.
that's not something we want to talk about on a Sunday morning like this. It has a very calm weather, but we just hope that those who've lost their life, God will comfort the loved ones and also get a repose of their soul. And then this country tends to go beyond all this death and issues around tragic moments. It's
Honestly,
really very touching in some.
I feel different shades of tragedy, from insecurity to bad roads to the economic woes and all of that.
That's a whole lot of concern.
Honestly, it is really concerning.
We hope we get past this someday and we'll go back to Nigeria. We used to know that it's calm, the roads, you can travel, no fear.
Someone was sharing like 10 years, 12 years ago, he says he could travel from Abuja here to Kano to Maiduguri on the road at night, and it would be a seamless journey. He even said he even enjoyed it more because it was in the night and all of that.
I prefer road trips at night because it's not sunny anymore.
Yes.
The weather is cool and calm, and you can just know that you're just going to sleep all through the coziness of the, of the weather, and then you enjoy your trip. But that's it. Well, We look forward to such day.
Amen. Very big amen.
As soon as possible. But let's quickly tell that that's the size we can take on newspaper review segment. Thank you for staying with us. Let's quickly turn our focus to discussion segment as we have a guest who's standing by to speak to us on issues around Nigeria's well-being and the budget's implementation. Please stay with us.
Wake up with Global Morning, your daily guide to what's happening and making the rounds.
We delve into headlines, newspaper reviews, spot-on analysis, policies, current events, real talk, real issues that affect us all.
From the latest trends to the debate, every topic, every angle, Global Morning is where it all starts.
Global Morning,
For the latest issues,
always on point.
watch Global Morning Monday to Friday at 7 a.m., Saturday and Sunday at 8 a.m. on Global Television.
Quality doesn't start on the shelf, it starts at the factory. At Aerogym Garments Factory, every stitch reflects precision, comfort, and creativity. Across our production floor, more than 10,000 fabrics move through daily, becoming up to 5,000 finished garments. From senators to chinos, jeans to polos, t-shirt, singlet, overall, customized jacket, safety wear, school uniform, and more. When garments need to look professional, fit properly, and last, choose a factory that delivers excellence every time. Go for Aerogym Garments product located at number 1 Pound Road behind the Nigeria Correctional Service, Aba, Abia State, Nigeria. For inquiries, call 09126453399 or 07030093944 or 08065738374 or call 09131673668. Email info@aerogym.com. Website www.aerogymdesign.com. Aerogym, where excellence crafted for confidence.
At Witchtech Cables, we don't just make cables, we deliver excellence. Our products are built with advanced technology, trusted for their unmatched quality and durability. With a wide range of cables, swift delivery, and continuous innovation, we stay ahead of the market demand. We are proudly Nigerian, fully indigenous, yet world-class. Backed by a professional team, strong technical support, and a deep commitment to customer satisfaction. Witchtech Cables is more than a brand, it's a promise. Witchtech Cables, quality cables better than the best.
It's good to have you join us back on Global Morning. Of course, we have a whole lot of things to talk to you about in Nigeria. A whole lot happening. We've seen across the newspaper review segment, we had a whole lot of stories from politics to business. But we want to talk about Nigerians and the spending deadline for extension. We'll look at the types of fiscal flexibility or policy failure in the making. That talks about the budget and its implementation from what the presidency have. Let's quickly give you a breakdown to basically what this is about. Welcome to this particular segment. I'm still here and I'm Anita Patrick, and of course I still have Muntari Kasim.
Certainly, we're here.
Of course, a whole lot to talk about. But let's quickly give you a background. Our big conversation this particular hour talks about Nigeria's fiscal direction under scrutiny, and Muntari, of course.
Of course, President Tinubu, as we know, he has signed the 68.32 trillion naira 2026 budget, and that has been signed into law. And crucially, that actually extends the 2025 spending deadline from the previous one to about June 30, this 2026.
And looking at all of that, this shows a pragmatic move to complete projects, of course, and a sign of deeper fiscal inefficiencies. So that gives us a group. But let's break it down for our audience to actually follow suit to why we need to look at these concerns. Well, President Bola Tinubu has approved a record of 68.32 trillion naira budget for 2026, which is significant allocations to capital projects, debt servicing, and recurrent expenditure. Alongside this is the administration's extended the lifespan of the 2025 budget from March 31st to June 30, just like Muntari gave us that heads up, to allow ministries and agencies complete ongoing projects. Well, government says the extension is aimed at improving project delivery and ensuring value for money, particularly for infrastructure projects nearing completion, because we could have projects, of course, which have started the process, but the completion was one of the reasons why this was looked into. However, critics argue that repeated extensions signal weak budget discipline and also persistence of overlapping fiscal cycles in Nigeria's public finance system. Well, that brings us to one of the focus, which Muntari.
Of course, we have to put this into proper perspective, because Nigeria, we know, has struggled with budget and implementation over many timelines and for many years, of course.
And then, of course, there's been a concern where Nigerians are asking why the cycle, why the drawing back, why the extension,
back and forth
with all of this. Well, exactly the reasons why we're looking at this. And despite promises to return to the strict January-December cycle, we're still seeing rollovers and extensions, of course.
So the big question people have been asking is this a smart fiscal flexibility, or is this a failure of policy in disguise? That's the question Nigerians have been asking.
And to join us answer this question, of course, we need an expert to break this down, is Dr. Aldo Liberty Oseni, who's the Director, Center for Development Communication, and he'll be speaking to us on all of this. And it's good to have you join us, Dr. Oseni. This is something that needs a whole lot of breakdown. We need Nigerians to understand why this is happening. Why not still maintain the January-December cycle of the budget? Why do we still need to have extension and across board? So this is confusing for many Nigerians. Maybe you can help us understand the decision so far.
Well, thank you for having me. I hope you can hear me. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Thank you for having me. And again, good morning. And I am glad to have this conversation. But to say that I don't know how you're looking at it, and I don't know the perspective you're taking. But I think for me, really, there are two issues that I need us to look at. Irrespective of what people are saying, irrespective of how government communication paints it or frames it, I think we should look at in terms of what I call fiscal rascality and institutional capacity deficits. Because for me, really, the 2025 spending deadline extension, for me, really, reflects less a case of physical flexibility, and more is more a governance and implementation deficits. Don't forget, this clearly signals weak institutional capacity, just as I had said, for budget execution. Delays in funding disbursement, delays in funding disbursement or absorption, and a systemic inefficiency within public sector delivery structures. We shouldn't forget that. And in this sense, for me, really, the issue is not merely budget discipline, as the government wants to put it, but state capacity and policy implementation failure. Don't forget, the Minister of Health, I think Ali Pate, I just hope I called his name well, said before the National Assembly that his ministry got about 1% of the budget. He's not the only one. Several ministry, departments, and agencies that appeared before the National Assembly members, they said that they didn't get money. Money was not released to them. Now the question is, in a country where we have cases or clear cases of lack of transparency in the management of public resources, how do we situate this kind of behavior? And again, don't forget that the Federal Executive Council admitted to lawmakers that the billion of naira appropriated by the parliament. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can
Hello,
hear you.
can
Please
you
go.
hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
So, yes, I'm saying that the Federal Executive Council, admitted to the lawmakers that billions of naira appropriated by the parliament, for infrastructure, health and development projects were never released to the ministry. And we want to hear the conversation. Why did that not happen? So, what is this conversation about? Or what you're talking about is physical discipline? No, for me, really, it is not physical discipline. The state needs to come out clear. Of course, there are conversations around. Of course, I don't want to take that serious because it's normal thing politicians will say that because that's their way of life. Looking for opportunity, of course, some are even saying that the monies were stolen, but I don't believe that. But I think that the government has the responsibility to come out clear, to explain to Nigerians what has happened, because I had expected the National Assembly members that granted this extension to ask the government, why did you not release the money? And where is the money? Don't forget that we have this thinking that even in the fiscal year, we prepare budget. The budget is actually an appropriation act. So we need to see government release funding. And how come the monies that were not just released, we are talking in terms of capital expenditure. Why were they so easy? Why was it so simple for them to spend? Sorry, let me not use the word squander. To spend the current expenditure. And in this country, we have seen the president, we have seen even the National Assembly members themselves implement projects that were, some of us said, didn't have the National Assembly approval. We saw these guys do that. So why is it that when it comes to the implementation of physical projects or capital projects tied to the national budget, people are telling us that the monies were not released, and there is no clear communication. And the only communication we are hearing, we are seeing, is that it's tied to physical budget discipline. No, 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 no. I don't believe that. I do not believe that because the MDs themselves had come to say that we didn't get money. Money was not released to us, and the question therefore becomes why. So there are two issues we should be looking at. Now, for me, is physical rascality. I'm sorry to use the word, but that's what it is. Second, we need to interrogate state capacity to deliver. State capacity to deliver. What are the issues? Is it procurement processes? Are they the issues? Are they the issues? So the state needs to clearly explain. But I also had expected the National Assembly members to actually put the state on its stool to explain why didn't you release money? What has happened? Why carrying it? So who you see the issue, let me explain to you now. You see, the extension for me really, the extension for me really is not evidence of physical flexibility, which I have said, but a manifestation of deep governance and implementation failure. This is what it is. Because why often framed as administrative necessity, the pattern of extreme under release of appropriation fund, sometimes below 2%, as we have seen, reveals a state that plans inability. And I think that in such a context, a budget extension, we shouldn't forget that budget extension becomes a tool of continuity and more mechanism that marks systematic inefficiency and weak accountability. So I need you to underline the word systematic inefficiency and weak accountability. Who accounts for the money? Oh, before we know, 2027 Swiss budget is running concurrently. Who accounts for the money? I think that we should get serious in this country and stop this narrative that tries to make it complicated without clear communication. This is what I think.
I'm looking at this thing because you've talked about how this shows the inefficiency and the accountability and the concerns that needs to be looked at and why this extension keeps spanning over time. So these are questions that need answer. You've just explained we have capital projects that are always there, but implementation becomes a problem or completion becomes a concern. So the thing is, concerns are or questions are asked. What does this extension really mean in the fiscal policy terms? Because if we have this repeatedly, how do we tend to find, because for the common man, he's trying to understand fiscal policy, all of those grammars that come with all of these terms. But for we, the elite, who understands this thing. So what does this really mean for fiscal policy terms that benefits the people when it comes to the extension year in, year out? Because we always see this extension coming where there's no completion of one, or one is being proposed, and another one is still in the long run coming to bear, basically.
Well, let me say that what this means, the state explanation, is that it did that perhaps to guarantee fiscal responsibility, which is that the state argues that it wants quality, and it also wants what's the right word now? It wants value for money. Exactly, that's the right word. The state wants value for money. So what this means is that every penny spent should be accounted for. That's the conversation the state claims. But the truth of the matter, therefore, is that we live in a country where we have seen this kind of thing not turn out the way it ought to be. Don't also forget that before the budget was drawn, debated, and approved, these things were tied to clear. I believe that it will be prepared based on clear identified problem that needed to be addressed. So we needed to see the state release the money. I think that refusing to release money is not the way to go. What happens is that releasing the money should go with accountability. And this is where I try to explain to people that what we need to do is to go beyond transparency to accountability. Transparency means that you have released 1 trillion to the Ministry of Works and Housing, for instance. Then accountability means that the state should explain to citizens using the instrumentality of what I call participatory communication approach to explain to the citizen how the 1 trillion was expended. So what I'm trying to say, therefore, is that yes, if the state there's every need for the state to ensure that every penny counts. There's every need for the state to ensure there's value for money, but an inability to release funds to military department and agencies, hiding under the bureaucratic rectapism or the bureaucratic bottleneck, or under the disguise of value for money, says a whole lot. Because I had wanted the National Assembly to prove better, to ask questions, what has happened to the money? Because the implication of this, therefore, let me answer your question. The implication of this, therefore, is that you have a country where budget is being drawn, budget is being planned, National Assembly grants approval, and you have Appropriation Act. And at the end of the fiscal year, what you're hearing is that only 1 or 2% of money meant for physical or capital expenditure was released. And the other way around, the money meant for the current expenditure practically was fully released. What this means for me as a development communicator, what this means for me is that really the state is not interested in addressing any problem. The state is interested in living. So the officials of the state are just interested in living a comfortable life. They didn't have any problem taking money for recurrent expenditure, which is perhaps their salary, their entitlement, their emolument, their travel. Fantastic. But when it comes to the physical project, which plays huge role in the development and growth of a society, we begin to hear that the money was not released. And why was the money not released? That is the fundamental question we should be asking. That is the fundamental question we should answer at the micro level, we should answer at the macro level, we should answer at the meso level. Until we get to that level where the conversation is around systematic inefficiency and weak accountability system, until we address this problem, this is going to happen next year. But let me also say, because this is national television, my training in development communication, I have clear understanding. I do not find it funny. I am not an expert, and I've never claimed to be an expert, because in development we learn and unlearn. Of course, I consider myself development communication authority, but I'm not an expert. And most importantly, I discuss development. That's what I do. So I do not agree that what they are talking about in the case of physical budget responsibility to have value for money is the issue. The issue is the structure, systemic inefficiency and accountability. The state needs to explain what has happened to the money, because we are in a society where accountability takes a backseat. This is what I'm saying.
That's which are concerns to you. Of course, like you mentioned, you're just on development side and you're looking at how growth and how that can be palatable to the people, if I get you correctly. We want to look at all this things, and Mukhtar has something basically to throw to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Doctor, for putting this in proper perspective. You've outlined the background to this particular incident, and the people who have supported this particular development, they've said it is in line with global best practices. So in your own perspective, is this not what happens across the world? Is Nigeria different from what we've seen across the developmental world, if you like? Is this something that's out of the ordinary, or it's in line with global best practices? That's my question.
Now, I want to ask you a question. You see, this is my frustration when I have this conversation. And it's my frustration. What do you mean by global best practices? So when it comes to covering state inefficiency, it's a global best practices, right? And who defines global best practices? Who defines it? So when it comes to delivery, when it comes to separation of power, when it comes to the dividend and the delivery of governance, made possible via democracy, you talk in terms of global best practices. Of course, even if it is a global best practice, as you have said, global best practices demand that the state provides valid explanation. That's what it is. The global best practices demand that the National Assembly members rigorously investigate what has happened, why was the money not released, and communicate clearly to the citizens what went wrong. That is what global best practices mean. And I do not like the word global best practice. I should rather use the word the best practice. So the people shouldn't come and hide on the global. You do not justify. You do not just. There's nothing like global best practice. There's nothing like uniform governance everywhere in the world. And this is why we have what we call cooperative federalism. So the media narrative that you want to justify that on the basis of global best practices, it's for me, it's totally unacceptable. It is totally unacceptable, because let us see, if you say this is global best practice, I used to give people the example of Egypt. Egypt is an African country. I always tell people about Rwanda. I always tell people about Botswana. I always tell people about Mauritius. These are African countries doing fantastically well. You can't give excuses for failure, and all your explanation is that is global best practice. So it wasn't a global best practice when you were able to put money meant for recurrent expenditure. Do you understand? If it were to be global best practices, okay, let me ask you, let me not even talk about global best practice. Let's even talk of continental practice. How many times have you heard that the National Assembly or the lawmakers in Egypt put public resources to buy cars for themselves? If we have the National Assembly members that understand what their roles are, understand what their responsibilities are, we will be where we are. The National Assembly members that sing on your mandate we shall stand at the presentation of the national budget, rather than scrutinize the national budget. Is it the National Assembly members that will tell people this is the global best practice? I think that we should be serious in terms of governance issues. And I also think that the media should help Nigerian people. The media should help Nigerian people. It's not this comfortable narrative shouldn't be allowed to fly around. We need to hold those who represent the states. We need to hold those who govern us responsible. We need to hold them responsible. As a matter of fact, we should be able to hear that physical capital expenditure was released more than recurrent expenditure. These guys are not interested in solving any problem. And when you do this thing, you come out and tell us global best practice. They should mention global best practices that tolerate this kind of inefficiency in our system. This is what I'm saying, and I disagree with that kind of narrative. That for me, it's a lame intellectual narrative that is not acceptable to me as a person. This is what I'm saying.
That you talk about is, like you said, you're a development partner, expert. That's what mindset you have. You've talked about transparency, you've talked about accountability and the role of the legislature in ensuring that questions are asked to this kind of issues and why it needs to be looked into in-depthly. But I want to quickly ask, we talked about the MDAs who have also said they don't have enough to put out this project, because we talked about the capital expenditures and all of that. So my question to you right now, are the MDAs being rewarded for inefficiency? That's one question I want to get for clarity, basically, because if they also don't get enough, their inefficiencies, is that what they're rewarded for, basically? So we get that clear.
Exactly my point. When I talk about government, I'm not talking in terms of, I was not even talking about that. I was talking in terms, I said systemic inefficiency. It's across board. Don't forget that what we run in this part of the world is a patronage system. How many of them really understand what it means to effectively design and implement development projects that when you finish, that when you subject it into rigorous participatory monetary and evaluation process, you can point at measurable indicators and measurable success, measurable outcome, and measurable impact. How many of them? That's why I'm saying that for most of these guys, at the level of MDAs, at the level of ministry, department, and agency, for most of them, their own understanding about budget, about government is release of public fund, raise memos, and spend money irrespective of what. So I am saying that we will not be able to build a system that will produce competent people that will be able to run, design, and implement management issues. Have you not heard in this country where people returned, people sit on budget, fund approval or fund release? At the end of the day, people were asked to refund money. Or sometimes what you see is that they sit on the money 2 months or 3 months to the end of the fiscal year. You see them release money, do what we call performative theater development here and there, and retire the money. That's exactly what the problem is. So we need to understand that we need to pursue participatory development approach with people at the center, competent people at the center. That is what it means. Otherwise, if we know the implication of what it means, that at the end of the year, the ministers, at the end of the year, the permanent secretaries, at the end of the year, top government officials casually will appear before the National Assembly members with the audacity that monies were not released. And what the National Assembly members did was to say, yes, on your mandate we shall stand, and we are extending to June or thereabout to 2026. What was that? What is that? So I am saying that our incompetence, not incompetence, our systemic inefficiency has shown our systemic inefficiency and weak accountability is across board. And I am saying people be held responsible. The National Assembly people must do their job. Of course, you would have argued that the citizens should do that, but we don't have the citizens with the capacity to do that, because the concern of average citizen on the street is how to achieve the 3 basic physiological needs of Maslow theory: food, clothing, and shelter. So they are still struggling with that. But the National Assembly members that have been empowered should ask the necessary questions. When we ask the necessary questions, we get the necessary answers. So to your question, do we consider this as an incompetence or failure of the MDAs? My answer to that is yes, but not alone on their own failure, not alone on their own failure, because you cannot exclude the executive arm of the government, which is the fulcrum or the NG room where all the MDAs operate. So my own question therefore becomes that the executive arm of the government should explain to Nigeria what has happened to the money. This is the explanation. Because at the end of the day, what will happen is that when you get to June, July, oh, we will forget after all they have been extended. The question is that every year we do budget, how are we deploying public resources? We need to begin to ask questions. How do we spend public resources, public funds? Do we just
Okay.
do budget ceremoniously every year and
So if I may come in at the moment, doctor, if you can hear me, awesome. If I may come in at the moment, I get the passion, I get the drive, I get the fact that you've mentioned the three factors that the common man on the streets is also looking for: to the shelter, the feeding, and the clothing. Basically, that's what he's looking out for, because he doesn't understand where those who are supposed to check, or we are looking out for those who can check how they can ask the basic questions and get it right, and then there will be accountability and transparency to every physical credibility we need to get when it comes to this budget and the spending deadline given to the MDAs and also the authorities who are in charge of this. We'll just have to hold you down and we'll come back after this timeout where we need to continue this conversation. Please stay with us, doctor, and we'll get back to you. We've been talking about the 2025 spending deadline extension, fiscal flexibility or policy failure in the making. Of course, you had Dr. Oseni talking passionately from where the National Assembly needs to understand how that needs to work out for them. And it's not just around where the capital projects or how that is put into, but it is about accountability. You mentioned to him about the World Global Standards, and he was
critical about
he was
that.
critical about it. If that's the practice, what changes? What should change? What should we get right in the long run?
And like he said, who gets to define what is global best practice?
Yeah.
And if we cannot be, based on what he said, we cannot cherry pick what we consider as best practice.
Yes.
We're saying we want to abide by global best practices in our spending cycle. Why are we not abiding by global best practices in terms of infrastructure, in terms of those basic needs he has?
That people need to have.
So
in the long
if
run
we're
for
talking about global best practices, I think what he's saying is we should go all across board, not a particular segment that we call global best practice.
Okay, so while we look at all of those put in place, let's quickly take this breather, and then we'll have Dr. Oseni join us back, and we'll continue the discussion on all of these things and what should be done rightly while we take taste and texture. Please stay with us. We have something amazing that you wouldn't miss out. Please stay with us.
Hello everyone and welcome to Taste and Texture. Today we are going to be preparing boiled plantain and egg sauce. For the boiled plantain, we'll be needing the following: ripe fresh plantain, knife and clean pot, water. Here is the process of preparing boiled plantain. Wash and cut or dice your fresh ripe plantain into few pieces. In a clean pot, add your diced and washed ripe plantains. Add water, salt and cover to cook for a few minutes. Drop and drain the water, and then after a few minutes peel the boiled plantain and set aside. For the egg sauce, we will be needing a few fresh pieces of raw eggs. In a clean bowl, break your raw eggs and whisk. Get your clean frying pan and add oil to fry. Add your pepper, mix and stir for a few minutes. Then add Maggi and other seasoning of your choice. Then stir and add corned beef. Optional. Also stir your already whisked eggs and finally add parsley and stir it. Our boiled plantain and egg sauce is ready. And that's it on this episode of the show. I hope you will try this recipe at home. Join me again on Taste and Texture next time. I am Sadia Yakubu. See you again.
Amazing dish there for a Sunday. Mukhtar, I know, let's not even...
You know already now,
you know, because I know you to take that breakfast.
I needed it because the conversation we're having is one that's really complex to an extent, and it is really one that takes a lot of energy. So I've gone and reinvigorated myself with this very amazing, delightful breakfast, and we're ready for the second part of the conversation.
So why we wanted to understand, like Dr. Sani said earlier, he talked about the food, shelter, and the well-being of every Nigerian. That's one focus. So we wanted to tell you what to have while you listen to this conversation and understand where it stands, where accountability, where credibility needs to stand. We have given you taste and texture, and of course, what a beautiful meal to give you. We have boiled plantain and ripe plantain, and that's one of my favorites. And because it gives you, I think, iron,
energy, and all of that.
Energy, iron comes in.
It's a super packed meal.
You now have the protein of the egg in the sauce. You know, also have the vegetables as well, tomatoes, which gives you a balanced meal.
And of course, onion.
I know that's your best part. So talk about that, and that's one meal you should have when you're back from your worship places. Get back home, try that. It's really nice. Thank you to our chef who knows how to give us the best. Like he says, taste and texture. You need to feel the taste of this.
It's a very, very, very symmetric blend.
I know the wonderful weather we have here that is really cozy. Get some coffee, really nice coffee if you like, and then try it with that. That means you don't want to sleep, you want to stay active.
Of course.
If you want to go to bed.
Why would they sleep? They should sleep. They should stay active and watch the
That's the reason why I proposed the
Exactly.
coffee. So you stay active, your eyes on the screen, and you're very attentive because, of course, there's a whole lot to talk about, and we need to understand where all this budgetary thing means, the implementation and the fiscal year, where most people are wondering the fiscal policy, what does it really mean? And of course, we have an expert who's on developmental communication who understands how all these things plays out, who wants us to look at the issue of accountability, transparency, and the need for who's in charge of basic things to always take responsibility. Because from what we're supposed to have January, December cycle of the budget, but when we now have extension, it becomes questions are asked. Why are we going into?
So whose benefits are we extending this?
So why are we looking at all the extension? Why can't it go? And then we also have the debt servicing. All of those questions are needing answers, and it's time to get a clearer picture of this for Nigerians to. Because we have the business class people who would want to say, why is it like this? When somebody you have goods and you go out and someone is saying, can you hold on the flow of money is not here, or you go to the MDAs where you have contractors, not being paid. So all of this we need to understand how the extension affects the economy and
even the everyday man, like you rightly said, it affects, because it's a trickle-down effect in terms of economics. When those contractors get paid, when those MDAs get paid, it trickles down to even the common man on the street and the market woman and the very basic nucleus. All of them are all, it's a chain. So it affects basically everyone, and that's why we all have to be concerned about this particular budget cycle and how it pans out for all of us.
Okay, so while we look at how this pans out, we're still going to be joined by Dr. Sani, but in the interim, let's also guide you through all of these things. Don't forget, we said the president has signed a 68 point above trillion naira. That was, and then we had an extension that came into it, and some questions will be asked around, could overlapping budget distort economic planning and investor confidence? Like I said, you have the investors coming, you have the contractors. All of those things are part of the concerns that are being raised. And then questions are being, is this extension inflationary or neutral to economic impact? Those are the questions.
Because like you said, investors will ask, if I'm not, because this actually is a question also that boils down to economic stability.
Yes.
If I'm investing in a particular economy, I need to know that my money is guaranteed. I don't want to come and hear that we have a distortion of our cycle, so this is going to affect the implementation of this particular contract or the payment cycle, or you have to wait. And you know how business people are, they like to do their things in a particular way that allows them to get paid as at when due. So if we have this particular distortion, it affects them. And of course, the questions around inflationary figures and all of that, because we know inflation is not one that is stable. You could have the figures jump into there, and if you're not able to do a particular business within a particular cycle and you allow it boil down to sometime else, it could be affected by inflation. Your 100,000 naira today might not be the same 100,000 naira tomorrow. So questions like that are all worth what people have been asking, and that's why this particular conversation is very timely. And of course, like our guest has been breaking down for us, it's one that is of major concern to everyone, and we'll have to see how that pans out and how this extension would affect all of us as Nigerians, basically.
So while we look at all those concerns and where it goes on, where the concerns are being asked, where we want to also tell you that basically we want to look at the way forward, how this can be looked into, because like Dr. Seni said, his own is accountability. Who's to be held accountable to all of this concern? Who is the person we should hold to say when this goes wrong, these are the right questions to ask? You know, he talked about legislature, where of course the budget comes to the legislature to say we want to look at this budget, and then of course the concerns that comes with it is it has to go to infrastructural projects or completion of projects, and because of course we have projects which have started in the first budget cycle, and then continuing to the next one, and then look at contracts like I mentioned. Concerns are raised to funding and how it doesn't get to reach the needed requirements that is needed for that project. Let's take for instance the road project. Like we talked about this earlier when we started the discussion, where we talked about the road networks and how people tend to travel these days via the air because of concerns on the road. Security concerns are there,
and the state of the roads.
You know, I was privileged to be on the roads just 3 weeks back. And the road network for me had a lot of concern, and I was wondering at what point will this project be completed, you know. So, and that still comes back to the budget cycle, how it works and what is supposed to be put in place and what measures to the funding put out. So the implementation is where we have concerns. Like he also mentioned, we had instances where allegedly, like he said, people sit on fund release and it doesn't come out where it is needed. You know, so all of this it is high time people are held accountable when funds are released, when budgets goes out for capital projects, you know, overhead costs. All of those things are things they need to pay attention to and look at how it benefits the common man on the streets, where the common man knows there was a budget that was given out, and when they hear the humongous amount that comes out for a budget cycle, they don't feel concerned, because you know at some point I beg your pardon, you have this translates into projects that benefits the common, because like you mentioned, the basic thing the common man looks out for is shelter, you know, food, and you know
clothing.
Let's
just have something.
So let's have something. So it just translates into those basic needs for the common man. All of this nagging and complaints and, you know, why extension, why this, why critics go, would limit to the barest minimum, basically.
And of course, he talked about the National Assembly, and it's a bit of an indictment, not really so much of that, but he talked about how they should not just sign everything that comes from the executive, because they are supposed to be an arm of government that is independent of the executive. So whenever it is a budget is presented to them, they just don't say, because this is one from the president, and then we have to just assent to it. They have to do a due diligence and a scrutiny of that particular budget to see that if it's in line with the dictates of the Constitution, and if of course it's one that allows for transparency, one that allows for accountability, or one that is all-encompassing in terms of the benefits it brings to the people. Because as legislators, their basic responsibility is representation. They are there for the people, and not everyone can be in the National Assembly. All of us as Nigerians cannot be in the National Assembly at the same time. That's why we have elected representatives across the two chambers, whether it's in the red chamber or in the green chamber. They are there to stand for the people, to make sure that they are able to scrutinize what the executive is doing. So that's one that they should take as a call to service by the people, and they should know that it's a responsibility and a duty upon all of them to ensure that they are able to make sure they do the due diligence in their own part, so that we have a budget cycle that is in line with global best practice.
So you get back to the budget, the global best practices, where Dr. Seni was asking you, that should be a norm. Even if we have that, who sets the standards?
Exactly, who sets the standard?
all of that. So basically, talking about standards and who sets the that for people, the concerns or what questions are asked to see what reforms are urgently needed to fix Nigeria's budget cycle. I think that's one thing Dr. Seni needs to speak to us about.
Yes.
So we understand how better reforms. Yes, he's talked about one of the things he thinks should work. But for him, basically, is checkmating. There should be checks and balances. There should be proper explanatory way or ways, basically, to make things work differently for the people. So the budget cycle, yes, if it was a year in January, December thing, if it works in, for instance, let's say January comes in, or December, it comes in like December to January, and then once it comes in, all of the scrutiny is done from the MDAs, from the National Assembly, to check what was on the previous budget cycle, what level of investment or implementation was carried out across the different projects that were proposed, and also what were the returns that got into the government's coffers that can also come in as a generation of funds that are added, or that we gave you some amount of money to go to put into something, how much we're able to get back, because of course we need to look at IGR as well. What comes
very
in.
important.
Very important. So of course, because if they give you something, it means you should generate and give back to the. So all of those are things.
Questions.
I like the fact that yes, year in year out, we also have the budget defense, the budget presentation. In that forum, gives room for the MDAs
to come and
defend, and then questions are being asked at that particular committee level where these MDAs come to present their budget and talk about the issues. But beyond that, we need more sit-ups. For me, I feel there should be more sit-ups whereby it is cut across boards, and even the contractors, everyone will also benefit from that.
Of course, certainly, and of course, debt. Another aspect was debt servicing, because we've seen that Nigeria has been falling into a lot of debt, and it's one that is worrisome for our economy. And with this particular budget cycle, we hope that we see that addressed, because debt is an integral part of every economy. It's not only about Nigeria, it's something that happens across board. But the question is, how are you offsetting these debts to ensure that you do not have it affecting your mainstay of the economy? Because of course we have the recurring and the capital expenditure. Whenever it is that your recurring expenditure outweighs your capital expenditure, then you know that you're not having a very good term in terms of your economy. So those are questions that would have to be addressed, and of course we have many other issues that has been pointed out by this particular cycle, and basically it's just one that needs to find a balance, and then we need to regularize it to ensure that it's all in sync. All stakeholders in terms of the National Assembly, that's the executive arm, alongside the legislative arm, they all have a synergy to ensure that all of this work together, because it's not one that can work unilaterally. It's never been done like that. Even across board, we see that it's going to be both of them working in synergy and ensuring that this particular stuff that we talk about, which is the budget cycle, they all come together and it works together for the benefit of the common man, like we always say. Because at the center of all of this, which is governance, we all know that governance has always been about two things. It is basically servitude to the people as a government, and of course giving them security. And you cannot give either of these, whether it is in welfare or whether securing the people, if you do not have sorted out your budget, because it's from that same budget that you are able to dish out provisions for security, dish out provisions for infrastructure and all of those things. So it's one that is one of urgent importance, and we hope that it's sorted out as soon as possible.
Well, I like the fact that if that is sorted out, it gives a long weight off the shoulders of Nigerians, because that's one way we look at debt servicing. Is one conversation that has keeps on coming, because questions are asked. With all this debts all around, where are we as a nation? These are things that run into generations over time.
Certainly.
And then the younger generation are asking, at what point will we find the time to breed?
Like I told you earlier, with me myself, we're saying, okay, each person now is owing about 700 plus. Yes. I've not even seen that money yet. So I have to go and pay.
Who did the maths?
Exactly, who did the maths? Of course, it's for humor and all of that, but on a very serious note, it's not. We can't continue living in that state of mind.
Okay, so we still have our guest joining us virtually here, and he's still going to speak to this issue. Dr. Seni, it's good to have you join us back on the program. Well, like we said, there's a whole lot of questions that need answers, and we want to look at the economic impacts of all of this extension. So my question to you right now is this extension inflationary or neutral in economic impact? And let's talk about the way forward and how this can be mended and to see that Nigerians feel the impacts more in a positive way.
Well, I would want you to clearly frame your question so that I clearly understand where you want me to intervene. Did you get that?
I didn't hear you.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Go ahead. I wanted to hear what you said when I asked the question on the economic impact, but you said something. I was trying to get what you said.
I said that I need you to frame your question clearly so that I understand what my response will be. I didn't get the question clearly.
I said we've been talking about the budget and where accountability should be, where it turns the National Assembly to ask basic questions or pertinent questions, and then there should be proper alignments to all of that. So I'm asking basically, is this extension inflationary or neutral in economic impacts? Because we've talked about the budget extension and how this affects a whole lot of things. So I want to know, let me start with this first so you understand me. Could overlapping budgets distort economic planning and investor confidence? Because we've looked at how this is cut across the board.
Well, clearly that does. But I think that what we should look at clearly is its consequence in, yes, an economy, yes, on accountability, yes, on citizen perception, yes, on foreign perception. In terms of investors' confidence, directly, I don't think it will, but because of the kind of perception it creates, it makes us look like a country which is not serious about governance. That's what it is. Secondly, it makes us, the citizens, look at governance as something that has nothing to do with accountability. When you find yourself into governance, you treat public resources as your personal property, and nobody's held accountable. On the issue of economy, of course, you need money. You need money to do the necessary things. And when I talk even economy, I'm not talking in terms of to go and construct roads, which is also part of it. But also we need resources to fix infrastructure. We need resources to run sustainable economy, sustainable policies that really address, sustainable policies that make room for viable economic growth. Again, let me say clearly, for those who clap for neoliberal models, the market fundamentalists, those who think that a neoliberal model, naked capitalist movement is the way to go. Even in a naked capitalist movement, in a neoliberal society, which is not even obtainable anywhere in the world, the state needs to actually provide the development, provide the infrastructure. And we need money to provide this infrastructure. We don't have light, for instance. We don't have health. We don't have roads. We don't have basic infrastructure that will lead to development. We don't even have viable economic policy that will, we don't have workable economic policy that will lead to viable economic growth. And I think that these are the reasons, these are the areas we should be looking at. And by the time you still run this kind of, you have budget approval from the National Assembly, some persons go out there and don't release the money, speak the English of physical budget responsibility, come back to tell you, give me more 3 months, give me more 6 months. At the end of the day, you roll it over. Everybody goes, nobody's held accountable. That's not how to manage public resources. And a country that behaves that way is not a country that is going to make any meaningful progress, because every penny in budgets or every penny released is tied to budget, is tied to activity, it's tied to expectation or even assumption. It's tied to, so these guys have been able to spend the current expenditure, the money that puts the one that their salaries, no problem, their everything comfortably taken. But the thing that benefits the Nigerians on the streets, what people call ordinary Nigerians, because I don't like the word ordinary Nigerians, because there's nobody that is ordinary Nigerian. We are all Nigerians. The Nigerians on the streets, you and I, if they are telling you it's not only 2 or 1 or 2% released, the question is how. So when you run this kind of thing, definitely it's going to have not only negative effects, but it's also going to affect economic growth and social development. This is my take on that.
Okay, so let's talk about the okay, so all right, so let's talk about reforms. There are reforms that basically needs to step up and to ensure that it is clear and fixing Nigeria's budget cycle. So I want to ask clearly, what reforms, in your perspective, yes, you've talked about a whole lot of things, should we pick to be that is needed to fix Nigeria's budget cycle? That's one. And then let's talk about should Nigeria rather, because if I don't like to use the word ordinary, should Nigeria legislate stricter penalties for budget delays? I would want you to speak to this issue, the reforms, or should we have stricter penalties for budget delays? Because that's where we always have concern. Because you mentioned earlier where we have instances where someone sits on fund release. Those are concerns that need serious attention to be dealt with.
Well, I don't know. You're taking the conversation to different level, but that's a conversation. I think that should be conversation for another day. But then again, since you're talking in terms of reform, let's talk about it briefly. Let me say, there is no country in the world, or let me also restrict people to Nigeria. Nigeria can never, I'm sorry, I'm not a project of doom, but Nigeria can never see development. Nigeria can never see growth under the neoliberal economic policies we are running. Never. It's never going to happen. Because no country in the world, and I challenge any economy, and because what we have, what we do in this part of the country, that the economics in Africa, economics in Nigeria, have decided to abandon developmental economics and have decided to embrace neoliberal economic policies that have destroyed the world. As a matter of fact, Chile is one of the countries that the neoliberal policies almost destroyed. So as I speak, you see this conversation, let me bring it down to everybody's understanding, that we have removed subsidy, we have floated the Naira, it's never going to do anything because, look, what happens? The primary responsibility of the state is to do business because the state actually exists to manage public resources. The state must be at the hand of industrialization policy and industrialization discourse. And before the state pushes, or let me say, the only way to grow and to develop economy anywhere in the world is through industrialization and creating sustainable jobs. And the only way you create sustainable jobs is through industrialization. That is what it is. And the state must be in charge of industrialization. And that is why countries like China, countries like, you see, Japan, even in most of the European, some of the European countries, countries that need development must step in the form of grants, in the form of loan, in the form of what do they call it, subsidy. You can't take away subsidy. There is no serious country in the world that leaves its economy in the hands of a free market, because capitalism does two things. The primary role of the basic loss of capitalism is profit-making maximization. That's what it is, and exploitation. Or let me ask you, the reason they told you and I that they are removing subsidy is because the state cannot survive subsidy, and they want to make more money and stop borrowing. Have we not borrowed more money since the removal of subsidy? Because what they told you when they removed petrol, when they removed subsidy in diesel, is that the market forces will force it down. Has the market forces forced diesel down? This is about 2,000 something naira. And the same thing applicable to petrol. So what are we saying? And as a matter of fact, and this is also some of the conversation when I have them, I get very angry. It is purely wickedness and intellectual vain to even sell crude in this country based on dollar exchange rate, because the CBN Act clearly criminalizes trading in Nigeria with any other currency other than the naira. It is when you move the crude outside of this country, when you trade within the Community of Nations, that is when you talk in terms of dollars. So it's criminal, I'm sorry, but it's criminal to trade in dollars. CBN Act makes it criminal to trade in dollars in Nigeria. So this conversation about trading in dollars with Dangote, whatever, it's completely out of the place. But let me say clearly that petrol is the Nigeria energy sector. That is what it is. And if you would think that we can make progress through embracing neoliberal model of subsidy removal, what do they call it? What do they call it now? Naira, this thing, we are not good, because what has happened, I need the media to understand what has happened in energy, in the petroleum sector is not reform. That is not reform. We just make announcement because it is not, the state does not need capacity to remove subsidy. You don't need capacity to remove subsidy. Where capacity is needed is in sustaining the subsidy governance. That is what it is. So states must take control. State must fund infrastructure. The state must support infrastructure. The state must hand out what do they call it? Credit loan to what do they call it now? To small and medium people, businesses. As we speak, even as I speak to you now, where I live in Abuja, we don't have lights. There is no light. Just now, we were lucky that today we were able to see light like 2 or 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours. And how do you do that in a country where a liter of petrol, is about 1,400 where I live? And so these are reality. So the state needs to calm down. The countries that go and use IMF and tell the Nigerian state that the way to go is through neoliberal for the purpose of intellectual conversation. Yes, we should be talking about neoliberal, but for the purpose of economic applicability, no country in the world runs on neoliberal and make progress. So, and I challenge any economist to come and show me countries that have put people out of poverty using neoliberal model. What neoliberal does is to destroy economy, It does two things. One, it produces the few elites who are super rich and massive citizens who are dangerously poor. So this thinking that you're pushing neoliberal, and if they ask the government, the only thing they say is that we have our economic reform is using benefits. Which benefits are they talking about? Let them go to market and price and listen, see the price of goods and services in the market. That is where it must reflect. So this conversation here and there and there, that's nothing. It's not going to do. So this economic reform we are pushing, subsidy removal, and as a matter of fact. As a matter of fact, have we stopped borrowing money? You know, the money you have made the subsidy removal, what you did, you gave the money to state governors. They have more money, and again, there's nothing to show. There's nothing to show. The state governors are making more money. The federal government have more money. Everybody is just feasting on the money, and there is nothing to show that the country, this same country we are talking about today, is a country, despite the subsidy removal and the money we've made, we are still struggling to release money for capital projects. And when you see the whole of this contradiction, it is not about embracing neoliberalism. It's about embracing government.
Okay, so I like the fact that you've broken this down a whole lot. You've talked about it from the different reforms, because you said, let's talk about the bits, but you've taken it far beyond the bits. I like the fact that you brought in the fuel subsidy and how this has raised concern, how it has affected a lot of people, and where we are today. But one thing you said that caught my attention and I wanted to speak to is the issue around the debt concern, which is also the part of the borrowing. Well, a large portion of 15.8 trillion naira is going into debt servicing, which is one of the part of the borrowing. At what point does this become a concern for the economy? Let me follow up with that. And are we borrowing too much? And how sustainable can we? Because I told my co-anchor here, I said, we've gone into the borrowing space far too long, and generational to come rather are saying, at what point can we pay off this debt? At what point can we finish servicing this debt? So my question to you is, are we borrowing too much? Is this sustainable in terms of servicing? And how does it affect the Nigeria? How does it change anything for Nigeria when it comes to the economy?
Well, I don't know what you want me to answer. As a journalist, I would always want to throw the question back. Are we borrowing so much? The truth of the matter, yes, we are borrowing money. And it's not even that we are borrowing money. There are nothing on ground to justify the money we are borrowing. Of course, some people that support the government will say, like your colleagues say, they will always tell you in international best practices, America is borrowing, other countries are borrowing. Good. But the question is, when you borrow, let's see the evidence for which you borrowed this money for. This country will borrow money, about $740 million from World Bank, to say they want to do economic reform. They will still borrow another one for another $740 million from World Bank to say they want to do economic revitalization reform. They will borrow money and call it a green energy transmission. They will borrow one and they call it electricity. So the truth of the matter, therefore, is that the uncomfortable truth that we borrow money in this country, misappropriate it and go back. Sorry, the country borrows money, misappropriates it and goes back. If you put the executive arm, put the legislative arm in a boardroom, demand verifiable evidence, measurable outcome, and measurable impact on the amount of money we have borrowed, together with even the fuel subsidy removal, the money we have made, there is absolutely there's very little to show. And I'm saying you can't run a country this way. We can't. We can't borrow money, perhaps allegedly, share the money, returns as a country to borrow another money. Every money should be, if you call the state governors from the state, as if how did you deploy public resources given to you in the last 12 months? They really do not have an answer. The only thing the presidency will tell you is that yes, our economic reform is yielding benefits. But when you sit down and tell us clearly, clear indicators on percentages on employment, education, health, infrastructure, they really do not have answer. All what we do in this was you give these words. And those who speak for governments, if you engage them, the only thing you hear from them is just abuse words and insult and abuse on those who they think are opposition members. Like for some of them who will be listening to me now, they will just say is an ADC or P2B apologist. That's what they'll say. But what we are saying really is that yes, we are having over 150 trillion naira. So the question is, what are we doing with the money? We have borrowed money even to the extent that we are talking about education for the women. Part of the World Bank. What's going on there? What is going on? So what I'm saying, therefore, is that the purpose of governance is to solve problems. That's why it's called governance. The purpose of governance is to solve problems. The purpose of governance is to utilize public resources. And I feel very frustrated that when you talk to adult Nigerians on the streets, the media people have been able to sell the narrative that politics is about interest. For God's sake, politics is not about self-interest. Politics is not an interest game. Politics is authoritative distribution of resources for public good. That is what it is. The deployment of public resources for public good. That is what it is. So this idea that what we do is that we raise money, we raise the local resources, we find a way to borrow money, and at the end of the day, we can't explain to the people what has happened to public resources. It's not where to go. It's what I'm saying. So to your question, are we borrowing too much? Yes. Not only we are borrowing too much, because there are no expressions on how we are utilizing public resources. And a country that behaves this way, cannot be said to be completed. Let me tell you, if you don't know, if you go to hospitals in this country, there are nothing really apart from the bed you're going to lie down and you're even going to pay at the end of the day. There are no functional government interventions in the hospital. If you go to public universities today, students practically buy everything, including marker to write on the board. So what exactly is the Nigerian government doing for its people? That's the question. As we speak now, the middle class are already embracing solar because there's no more light. People are digging their borehole. Where I live, we contribute money to hire private guard. I challenge people from Lagos to Abuja. There are no roads. Immediately after Lokoja, we'll be running on people's villages till you go to Ondo before you enter that funny road they call Express Road. Do you understand me? So what exactly are we doing with our public fund? I need to ask you something. God forbid, if Nigeria enters into war with another country, like what is happening in Iran, I can tell you that in less than 24 hours, there will be no Nigeria because we don't even have the capacity to do anything. As we speak today, if US wakes up to cut us off internet, decide to dismantle all the social media, who are we? What kind of sovereignty nation are we? I think that these emotions that we are whipping up sentiments is not the way to go. We need a state that has to come down to clearly begin to think in terms of development. Because really, as it is now, Nigeria is not pursuing anything. If I ask you now, what are we pursuing? What is our development priorities? What clearly are we pursuing in the next 4 years, in the next 3 years? There's nothing. And that is why, even as campaign is coming, put all the members of ADC, put all the members of PDP, put all the members of APC, put them in the boardroom and ask them, because all of them have one common goal, which is let's capture power. We have reduced democracy to periodic election. All the agenda is let's capture power. Nobody's telling you clear terms what they want to do and how they want to do it. So we're not discussing governance in this country. We are discussing politics. It's all about noise. We are making noise rather than discuss governance. And I'm saying, look, with the way we are going, I am not a prophet of doom. We are going nowhere. There are no clear policies. There are no clear development policies. There are no clear agendas we are pursuing. We are just buying time. If you mess things up, you move, another person comes, takes it up from there. And I think that my own appeal is that the media should help Nigerian masses. They should help Nigerian people. We should reframe, because democracy is not just about periodic election. Periodic election is just one component, cardinal part of democracy. Democracy itself is governance. Democracy itself is development.
So, Dr. Seni, you're throwing it back to the media. So I'm happy that because you have a background in the media as well, before you got into development communication, so you understand how this works and how we try to put out the right words for people to get understanding, and how we find the balance for the government and the people. And you talk about the dividends of democracy in terms of the governance of the people and all that. So when these things are brought in, what we do as journalists, which you know as well, is to report issues, and we try to stay on facts on these issues. So let's bring it back home to all the issues around the budget and how it affects the people basically. For the average Nigerian watching right now, who wants to understand and who feels your passion to how it has gone beyond politics or elections to governance, on how the people should feel the impact of the reality of the budget. So what should they realistically expect from this budget? Because like we've seen, 68.32 trillion naira budget. The people wants to know how it gets to them. And basically want to look at the food. Food prices dropped at some point. And we'll ask the questions, will jobs also increase if we have food price increase? Will transportation become cheaper? Because you talked about the fuel subsidy with part of the reforms. We talked about the issue around the Middle East, which has also brought in the increment in surge in price of transportation, and is also getting to the point where there's peace talks within the Middle East, all of those things. So I'm looking at that. How does this translate to what you've just said should be out for the Nigerian people and how it impacts them fully?
Well, I think that the government needs to do some few things. One is that the government needs to address insecurity. On the issue of food price, farmers must go back to their farms. There is no rhetorics we will do, and people can't go back to their farms. Governments must find a way to enable farmers to return to their farms. Government must find a way to address the issue of soaring farm inputs. Fertilizers and conditioner, I don't know how true it is. Somebody was telling me 2 days ago that a bag of fertilizer is almost 50 to 60,000 naira for those who manage to even get access to their farm. Again, government must find a way to address the issue of uh, transportation, because the money we have, the destruction subsidy removal has done to Nigeria economy is more than the benefit we have made. Of course, the state governors, the presidency, who have the direct to argue that subsidy has done. Now the question is, we need to find a way to balance the suffering and the subsidy removal, because you must find a way to make transportation affordable. That's what it is. Secondly, the only way to address poverty and unemployment is to create sustainable jobs. And the only way to create sustainable jobs is to embrace industrialization. This conditional cash transfer that you go and count some persons, you say they are poor, and at the end of the month you give them 50,000 or 60,000 or 15,000 of the all those Magnus Packer approach. They are not going to address the issue of poverty and unemployment. But let me say, because I'm on national television, and let people listen and understand. You see, the idea of measuring economic growth or development using GDP is what they call a colonial mentality or colonial and intellectual framing. Nobody measures economic growth now using GDP. So you have some basic questions to answer before you come to conclusion whether your economy is doing well. One is what is happening to poverty, what is happening to unemployment, and what is happening to inequality. These are the issues we should be talking about, not on economic GDP numbers that do not reflect the reality of the man on the street. So to this to come out and say, look, the truth of the matter, therefore, is that the subsidy removal, floating of naira, these are government policies that have brought untold hardship, have led to inflation. So how do we begin to address this thing? Also, I have listened to other people, because if the arguments that you're removing subsidy because of the corruption in subsidy, you want to increase, you want to deregulate. The question is, have the four refineries, are they working? Since subsidy, you remove subsidy, have you fixed the local refineries? Are they working? So these are the questions. So did you do reform, or you just enabled some few persons to be enjoying themselves? So the issue is that I think that we need to sit down and begin to address governance, so that at the end of the day, of course, the food prices came down during the time of harvest. As we speak today, a bag of rice is about 58,000 naira or 56,000 naira, or in a country where minimum wage is about 70,000 naira. Where I live today, there is no one-bedroom flat with water, as agents say, that will be less than 1.3 million. If you're paying 1.3 million or 1.2 million in a year, you are practically paying about 80,000 naira or 90,000 naira a month for your house rent. And a person that receives 70,000 naira minimum wage, how are you going to succeed? Come on, we should be very realistic, and government should go down to work. This is what I am saying.
And we want to really appreciate your time with us on Global Morning. You've actually simplified these issues and also brought to bear your own opinion to how these things can sit better what would have been done differently or what should be done differently, and also a way where Nigerians need to understand what goes around the budget cycle and how this goes in Mukhtar.
Most definitely, that has been a very insightful conversation. And once a very big thank you to you, Dr. Hussaini, for breaking it down to the level of where everybody and the layman can also have an understanding of this complex topic, basically.
Well, we have that there. We'll be speaking with Dr. Abdul Liberty Oseni, who is the Director for Center for Development and Communication. He's given us in-depth analysis of this. Once a very big thank you for your time, and we hope that from what you said, governance can stand tall and it can give the needed change narrative where we have accountability and checkmates to all of these things, and where capital projects or the likes of questions and answers when budgets are presented to the legislature can be looked into in-depthly, and then Nigerians can have a better stand to know when the budget should run concurrently to the year in, year out, and not just keep extending, and where we have concerns around the reforms like you mentioned as well. Thank you so much for your time and for being with us on Global Morning. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thank you for having me.
Speaking with him, and he really gave life to all of this issue. He talked about it truly. During the harvest period, we had foods were affordable. People could actually remember we had a guest who spoke to us about the value chain for onion, how safety measures, and also Dr. Sini has also talked about the fact that when security reduces to the minimum, agriculture will also stand out where farmers can get back to their farms and we can have a lot of food on the table. People where we can farm, we can till the soil, we can also go into harvest period where we have the food back, and also the transition from the marketplace also to the marketplace. We see how that works out apparently, and then we hope that we want to see that the budget cycle will have a stability, and then the borrowing and the debt servicing can also find a way, because it's like he said, are we borrowing too much? He said, yes, we're borrowing too much. We can't keep borrowing and keep servicing some way and then not look at the impact it has on us in the long run, because of course over time owners of the funds will come for it and you asking what have we really done so far with the fund. So these are things where he feels Nigeria is not just about planning, but execution remains a major concern, and then there's need to also change or ensure the budget actually delivers results if we want to put it in the right perspective for Nigerians.
Most definitely, Anita. He has really given us an in-depth analysis, and he has told us what we're doing not so right and what we're doing wrong. And if you talk about borrowing, which is a normal practice in economics, but the question is, you are borrowing and the person that is lending you this money is not giving it to you for humanitarian reasons. He's a business person, and of course he has conditionalities, and we all are aware that those conditionalities that accompany those amounts that we get comes at a very stringent rate, and as Nigerians, the people that actually bear the brunt of these conditionalities, which include things like inflation, bringing down your inflation rate and all of those things, those very, very many conditionalities, eventually boils down to the common man, and he's the person who has to bear the brunt. And one very pertinent thing he talked about is how, in his own opinion, we've misunderstood governance to be just beyond, to become politicking and interest. He said governance beyond politicking and the interest of politicians is defined also as servitude to the people, as allocation of resources across board to make sure you find a balance. These are things that we also should factor in when we are defining what we understand by the term politics. And of course, these figures, 68 trillion, is just figures. What does it mean to the common man? Because the common man might not even understand what this means. What the common man basically wants to understand is, I should be able to go to the market, to be able to afford my 3 square meals, to be able to have a roof over my head, to be able to have clothes, to be able to send my children to school, and all of those things. Those are what concerns the common masses. So if you're telling them we have a large budget and we're doing this and that in terms of paper policies, that's not what the common man wants to hear. He wants to see those things translate to his daily lives becoming better, and that's basically what we intend the government to do, not coming and telling us we have this. Of course we have improvements, but we need to see it in proper practice, not just on paper.
Well, talking about the flexibility or the failure of all of these things, when he talked about the budget extension, we saw the way he was able to break it down. And then where we need to understand that in one sentence, basically, we ask, is it flexibility or is it about the failure? And then he broke it down to key issues, budget size that comes in, and also, because look at the budget size, is also part of the, is also expanding rapidly when you look at the debt servicing that remains high in terms of implementation, and also the timelines of shipping or sleeping in these extensions that comes in as well. And also perhaps mostly the credibility of Nigeria's fiscal framework is also on the front runner or in the line for people to understand how this pans out in the long run for Nigerians, basically. Because like we said in part of the discussion, we look at how flexibility comes into budget or contract release, and then payback, because we have a lot of debt servicing. If you're servicing across board, you now have to prioritize at some point to see who needs it, or the highest bidder tends to get in the long run, and that tends to affect other things which are in the lower cadre, and then it becomes a problem. But hopefully, like you said, we hope that we get past this and we look at flexibility and where there's a soft landing to all of the concerns, even when you have plans to also extend budget.
Most definitely, and of course, the budget should be one.
The timeline of the thing.
Certainly, and he said we should also be people-centered, centering those policies around the people. And he's talked about when we measure our economy, we always talk about the GDP, but of course the metrics have gone beyond just measuring based on GDP. We've seen things like, okay, how was the rate of unemployment, what's the rate of poverty in your country? So you might have a large GDP, but if this very basic and common indices are not addressed in terms of poverty, unemployment, in terms of education and literacy, if those things are not addressed, then you cannot really truly tell yourself that you're progressing forward, even if you have a large GDP in terms of a paper presentation and paper policy. Okay,
well, with all being said, we told you earlier that we wanted to have that breakfast. I hope that breakfast served you well and you were able to stay awake and follow up, sit with us on this discussion so far. Well, that brings us to the size of this discussion. We hope that we've been able to put out one or two words, and from our experts' point of view, you understand basically what narratives needs to change if we must get right, or even if we have the extension of the spending deadline put out. That's the spending the deadline extension for the fiscal flexibility. That's the question is asking, fiscal flexibility or policy failure in the making, and he answered that. We also looked at it from the fact that we have a budget of 68.32 trillion naira, and so we asked if that is changing anything for Nigerians, and our experts broke it down to how things need to be put in perspective for Nigerians to feel the impact. Well, up next for us is aerobics, where we want you to see that, and this is not time to give you what to eat, also want you to shake up some things and live healthy. Stay with us as aerobics is up next.